Thank you again for coming to the Exit Right event. This is the last one for this year. We've had 3 so far, which I hope those of you that have seen them or been here found them interesting and engaging. I certainly have. I think we've had some fascinating insights. I think most of the speakers we've had so far have come from the seller side of this process. So founders, companies looking for investment and exit. But tonight we've got a slightly different viewpoint, I think, or sort of mixed viewpoint, but more, I think, from the side of the buyer this time. So getting some insights into what the buyer is looking for from your business in terms of investment and sales and exit. So hopefully they'll reveal some of their secrets to you tonight. I think what we've learned from this whole process is the earlier you start to think about where you want to end up, the better, rather than trying to rush something at the end when you haven't got your ducks in a line. So hopefully we'll learn what you need to be doing 2, 3, 4, 5 years out from an exit tonight. We've got 3 for the price of 1 today, so we've actually got 3 speakers for you tonight. I have to read from my sheet to remember who they all are. We've got so many. So we're going to start with David Perry, who is a seasoned business advisor, I think, with expertise across a range of related things, sales, marketing, also experience in the medical devices technology area, also has direct experience of selling a company as well as seeing it from the other side. So he's going to kick us off tonight. Then we're going to get a double act, which is Marcus Exall and Andy Mayer. We're going to talk about their experiences across a range of things, really, primarily M&A side of things, but also in helping startups, particularly in that journey to get to exit and finding buyers for them. So we've probably got quite a lot to get through tonight. We might have time for some questions for David before we move to the second part, but don't worry if you can't get them in, we'll collect them all at the end, hopefully with everybody back up again, and we'll have a bit of a dynamic discussion at the end. So start off with David.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for those of you who are here and those of you who are listening online. Thank you for registering. And can I thank Wendy and Oxford Innovations for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm going to talk about 4 key topics. The first one is acquisitions. Why do people do it? What are they looking for? What are the reasons for doing it? The second one would be, is it an appropriate strategy for SMEs? The third point I'm going to do is take you through the history of the company that I owned and ran for 22 years, which I grew by acquisition. I bought 9 businesses to build this business, and I'll tell you briefly about that. And then finally, I'm going to tell you how I went about selling it, and my experience of that, and some thoughts at the end on what I learned from doing all this. So, this isn't working, Wendy. Right. So, fundamentally, I found out when I came to sell my business is don't be afraid to ask the buyer what they're looking for and what they're trying to do. And you'll see why when I get to the end of this. So why do companies acquire? Well, the first obvious thing would be economies of scale. More of the same. Just doing more of the same, which particularly applies, I think, to small businesses. Most small businesses are not going to want more than one site. So if you can do more of the same, you're making better use of your assets, whether that's your factory, whether that's your admin, whether it's your sales force, whether it's your financial department, and obviously your working capital. Strategic reasons. to expand the product range, to go into another market. Sorry, I must remember to use this. Geographical expansion. Minimize competition, take competition out. Or to buy into a new innovative technology. So let's have a look at some of those in more detail. So more of the same. So you can just add more customers. You can add more volume. By adding more volume, and if you're a manufacturer, that might mean improving your leverage with suppliers, getting better terms for your materials. As I said earlier, making better use of your capital, of your machinery, of your workforce. Or geographical expansion. When Kraft bought Cadbury's, they wanted to improve their product range. They wanted to improve their product range in confectionery, but they also Cadbury's gave them the opportunity to expand into particularly markets like India, where they had very little presence with their food products, but Cadbury's were very strong in the Indian subcontinent. Or you can acquire in order to fill a product gap. Procter & Gamble bought Pringles, bought Tampax. Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's, bought Magnum to expand their product ranges. And some of the tech companies, Microsoft, have acquired 202 companies, including LinkedIn and Skype. Facebook have bought 98, including Instagram and WhatsApp. And Google have bought no less than 256 different companies, including Motorola Mobility. The other reasons, well, some of those reasons we just covered with the innovative technology. You are a technology company, but somebody else has invented something else, so you add that to your product portfolio. The other reason is simply because you want to be an entrepreneur, and acquiring an established business, a going concern, is an easier way than starting up from scratch. Now, is it appropriate for is it an appropriate strategy for small businesses? Well, yes and no. And I'm not going to sit on the fence exactly, but I would say if you're a company with an innovative product, you've got IPR, relatively little competition, and you've got good growth rates, it's probably better to concentrate on growing that, because acquiring companies is not a walk in the park, and it would take your eye off the ball, and it could compromise what you've already got. But that's not hard and fast. There could be some exceptions to that, and the two that stand out to me most obviously are, for example, if you're just based in the UK and you'd like to expand geographically, you'd like to go to France or Germany or Spain or Italy, it's one of the options you have for expanding geographically. You could go with an agent, you could go with a distributor, you could start your own business, but equally you could acquire somebody that's already there. The other opportunity might be, as we've seen with the tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, it's a technology that you haven't got, but which complements what you're doing. But on the other hand, if you're in a mature market, and this was what I was in, in the introduction, I was in medical devices, and I'd worked in medical devices. I worked in medical devices in total for 45 years, but I've been working in them for getting on for 20 years, and during a period of doing consulting work, I recognise that in the surgical instrument sector, i.e. this is the hardware that the surgeon actually uses for the operation, the forceps, the scissors, the retractors, the probes, things like that. It was an enormously fragmented market. There were 120 players in this country alone, just supplying and repairing surgical instruments. So if you're and it was a low growth area. So if you're in a sector like that, which is very mature, some of these instruments have been designed in the 19th century, low growth, highly competitive, very fragmented and commoditized, then the options for growing your business are somewhat limited. First of all, the first option you have is technical innovation. To quote Margaret Thatcher, somebody comes along with a better mousetrap than the mousetrap that's presently available. We've seen that in lots of commoditized markets, toilet paper, the softer or the patent or whatever it is. So somebody comes along with a technical innovation, but they are few and far between. You can cut your prices, but in my opinion, that's a short way to bankruptcy. But by its very nature, if it's a commoditized market, it's extremely price sensitive. Acquisition then becomes a viable strategy in this area. One of the things I found, and I don't know if anybody in this room or online has the same experience if they're in a mature market, is I found in my sector, surgical instruments, relationships between the seller and the customer were incredibly important. And we sold instruments either to the operating theatre manager or to the sterile services department. And what I found was that it was very fragmented, this sector, as I've alluded to earlier. Some companies were really very local, very regional, really very small. But the sister or the SSD manager liked dealing with Susan or liked dealing with Alan because they were round the corner. And if she or he needed something for tomorrow morning's operating list at 9 o'clock, they could get it because they were handy. And that relationship was terribly important and extremely difficult to break down. And the only way of actually overcoming it was to buy it. So acquisition strategy in those circumstances made a lot of sense. So acquisitions for a company in this kind of environment gives you new customers. It can give you a wider geographical spread. More products. It can give you add-ons to your product range. Again, better use of your assets. That's what I did. And it can potentially reduce the competition. I bought 9 companies. So we started off in 1997 when I started this journey with 120 companies. And by the time I sold the business in 2018, it was down to 92. I can't claim credit for all of those companies disappearing, but I did make a contribution. So I'm going to now tell you about my story. So this is the history of my company. So I created this company, which I called Surgical Instrument Group Holdings Limited, and I called it that quite deliberately to get the mnemonic of SI, which was quite handy and quite neat, and customers could remember it. And so I've incorporated the company in 1995. And then I started the search for potential acquisitions. And I made the first acquisitions in January 1997. The process had started back in 1996, probably back in April or May of 1996. And I bought 2 companies owned by the same gentleman. The 2 companies were called Baker & Thompson and Caterham Surgical. And part of the clue is in the name, because we were located in Croydon, not far from Caterham. 2 companies owned by the same guy. Why was that? Baker & Thompson were a manufacturer and repairer of surgical instruments to the trade. Caterham Surgical was a distributor of the manufactured products and repairs, and also selling instruments directly to the hospitals. So they covered the two aspects. So we bought these 2 companies in January 1997. My next acquisition was in 1999, March 1999, so nearly 2 years, a company called Veoplan. The vendors they were about the same age as I am now, and they wanted to sell, retire. And what we acquired with that was just more of the same. They were a distributor of instruments which they bought in, and we acquired the customer list and the stock. We moved it to our premises, so we were making better use of the assets, widening our customer base, and importantly, from our point of view, they had 3 extremely valuable contracts with the Ministry of Defence. So that was step 1. Step 2, in March 2001, we bought a company called Medical Innovations Repairs Limited, and as the name implies, they were doing repairs. So again, more of the same. So we moved it out of, this company was a distress purchase, so we moved it out of their premises into our premises. So we were doing more volume, more repair volume in our own site, wider customer base, and they did have one product which they were making and we weren't, but which fitted very well with our manufacturing side. June 2006, quite a major departure. Another distress purchase, Osborne and Simmons, who were extremely strong, had been extremely strong in this country in ophthalmic instruments. Now, we were not in ophthalmic instruments, so we were bolting on a new product sector, but sticking in surgical instruments. There were some repairs, much wider customer base, so that was a very interesting add-on. April 2010, another distress purchase, Endoscopic Manufacturing and Services Limited. They were based in Park Royal. If any of you have had to have a shoulder looked at or a knee looked at or your tummy looked at or worse, you'll probably know that the surgeon uses a telescope, what's called a telescope, but it's actually called an endoscope, to look into the joint or into the cavity. And we'd been doing repairs of those, but subcontracting it out to somebody else. We brought this in-house. So we brought another facet to repairs, the same customer base. It was still the theatre manager, it was still the sterile supplies manager, was the customer, and they needed to have these things repaired, and we brought it in-house. Then also in 2010, we acquired, it was our largest acquisition, a company called Decon Sciences Repair Services, who 2 years before had bought these 2 businesses, Abbey Surgical and Yorkshire Medical. And this was more of the same, more repairs and more distribution, but also it took us from being a largely southern company, a southeastern company, London and southeast, into the Midlands with Abbey Surgical, and as the name implies, with Yorkshire Medical up to past the M62 and on up to Newcastle. So we got geographic expansion and more of the same and better use of our assets by doing that. And then the final acquisition, 2013, this was a going concern. It was more repairs, more distribution, and as the name implies, this took us geographically towards the southwest of England and South Wales. So we got, again, more volume, better use of our assets, and geographical expansion. And then I sold the business in 2018. How I sold Psi. Why did I choose to sell that? Well, it was always the intention. That even from the beginning, the whole strategy was to build this business by acquisition and then sell it. Neither of my sons were in the slightest bit interested in taking this business on from me. And we weren't big enough, frankly, to have a management team where we could do a management buyout. So this was quite a long road, I have to say. So first of all, I talked to our accountant Kingston Smith, and quite rightly they said to me, well, the obvious places to go with a business like yours is either the United States or China. A lot of this kit is now made in China. So I approached a contact I had in the States who did M&A work, and he went out and he had 3 or 4 companies show some interest. But the problem, again, comes back to it was a mature sector. This is a very mature sector. There was a large indigenous supply in the United States of instrument makers, of instrument distributors, of instrument repairers. We were really quite small by comparison with for the US market. And they had other things to do, other acquisition opportunities. So I approached I thought, how do I approach China? Well, there was a guy in London who kind of brokered the association of Chinese companies looking for British companies which manufactured and had medical devices. And through this, I made quite a lot of contacts. And in the end, I've ended up with about 4 companies that had expressed interest in acquiring us. So I arranged to go and meet them at a major trade exhibition in Shanghai, and none of them turned up. And it's a long way to go for no shows, I can assure you. So I realized, I had a co-director. I realized that I was going to need some help with this. I could have gone out and approached the other companies, some of the other companies in the UK, to see if they were interested in buying us. But to be honest with you, I didn't really want to do that because it's rather giving the game away. It's rather saying, well, you know, you've lost interest and perhaps your commitment isn't there, and it's sending out perhaps some of the wrong messages. And that message also would get to your customers. So we realised we needed to use a broker. I hope I'm not going to be treading on anybody's toes here, but we decided to look into brokers, and we looked at 2 companies. We went to see, there are a lot of these companies, by the way. I've named 2 here, Benchmark and Turner Butler, but there's Kingsbridge, there's Knightsbridge, there's Daltons, there's loads of them, loads of companies out there doing this. We approached Benchmark and Turner Butler. And we interviewed both of them. We went to meet Benchmark. Although we were based in Croydon, the office that dealt with us was down at Milton near Didcot. And we went to see them. And very creditable company, quite well known, probably one of the majors in the field. When we looked at their portfolio, it was quite clear that they dealt with companies which were significantly bigger than we were. We were, by this time, just under 2 million. They were dealing with companies 10, 15, 20, 30 million. And I learned early on in my business career that small businesses should work with small advisors, whether it's an advertising agency, accountants firms, or lawyers. If you're a minnow and you go with one of the big boys, you're just too small for them to bother with. So we also approached Turner Butler. Now, those of you who have been reading business press for long enough will possibly remember in the Sunday Times and on the Tuesday copy of the Times, in their business sections, Turner Butler used to take a block ad at the bottom of the front page. And they just listed companies with a turnover and possibly an asking price. They've stopped doing it, although Turner Butler are still active. And we decided to go with Turner Butler because it looked as if their portfolio was much more around the size of business that we were. I mean, and they were also dealing with a lot of much smaller companies. So we went to Turner Butler, and possibly we're going to hear more about this in a little while. But the way that these brokers work is that they'll take an upfront fee for covering the cost of printing and generating teaser documents and memorandum of sale, or for placing advertisements. And then they'll take a percentage of the selling price of the consideration when you actually sell it. So what are the considerations? So first of all, you've got to decide who is going to be a likely buyer. We ended up selling to entrepreneurs, but quite frequently, the most likely next buyer is going to be a trade buyer in the same sector. Working out a value for the business. You can do that with the broker, you can do that with your accountant. How do you go about contacting potential buyers? Well, if you do it yourself, I would caution anybody about doing this because it would be enormously time consuming. If you're going to be ringing up people or emailing them or writing to them, it is going to take up a lot of your time, and that means you're not spending time running your business. Eye off the ball time again. So if you want to do it, you can use a third party, or you can engage a broker. So there, yes, I've listed some of the brokers there. Now, one of the things that I found was that, first of all, the broker told me this is an enormously stressful process. He wasn't kidding. They say that bereavement, divorce, and moving home are the three most stressful things. I can tell you that personally, having sold a business, that's worse than all three of them added up together. It is enormously stressful. And what I learned from selling to these entrepreneurs is, first of all, they wouldn't tell us what they were planning to do. Now, it's rather difficult for you to help them and guide them if they won't tell you what they're going to do. The second thing I learned was that it would have been really helpful to have had a mentor, somebody who had my interests at heart, knew the ropes, knew their way round, but was dispassionate enough to be able to say, David, you could dig your heels in here, or no, you're going to have to give in to this or accept this. But somebody I could have turned to and just talked this through with, and I didn't have that, and it would have been enormously valuable. So I'm being told I'm running out of time, and the final thing is, however you do this, if you do it yourself, if you use a broker who will do it for you, or you use somebody like me, you're going to have to create a teaser document and a memorandum of sale. And that is part of the process. However you do it, whether the broker does it or you do it, that's how you're going to do it. So I think I've overrun my time, so I better shut up and leave the floor to other people. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, David. It's no surprise, really, you ran over a bit because that's a lot of information and a long story to tell. Probably some people will have some questions for you later. Maybe rather than take questions now, we'll save them till the end because we are running over a bit. So I'm going to pass on now to Mark and Andy, who are going to tell us their experiences of various things they've done over the years.
Are we? Good. So I'll do my intro first.
You want to go first? Okay.
I'm Marcus Exall. I've been in digital tech for about 25 years. Started my first business in about 2002. Sold it in 2011. I've been an advisor to startups since. I've invested in 30 startups that have gone on to raise over $1 billion in venture capital. And I'm now on my fourth business, which I run with Andy.
You want to go?
You can do yours.
Right, so I'm Andy Marr. I run the M&A practice at Endeavour, and so that's based in London. Interesting what David was just saying about a broker. We probably don't call ourselves a broker, we're more of an advisory firm. So we come in and help your business grow, probably 2 years out from an exit, and then we spend that time with you just getting your business more professional, more profitable, and then we take you through the process. So just what David said, you're going out, identifying buyers, putting IMs together, finding those buyers, qualifying them in or out, taking them through chemistry sessions, due diligence process, going through the LOI, which is the letter of intent, and then going through the share purchase agreement to finish the deal. We could talk all day about that. Our question from Wendy was, what are purchasers looking for? So I think we're just going to run off a few things. We could talk all day about this. I think what we'll give you is probably just some experiences that we've had over the last few years about what purchasers are looking for. So I'll let you go, Marcus, on this one.
So one of the important things that they're looking for is, particularly if it's a strategic buyer. Actually, we'll probably start with, let's talk about the types of buyers, the type of people that buy businesses. So they're broadly split between people who are financial acquirers, and we'll come to what that means, and strategic buyers. And the typical split is about, in today's transaction volume, is about 30% of people that are buying businesses are financial acquirers, and 70% are strategic. So the difference is, so financial acquirers, they are typically investing other people's money to look for investment growth. So these would be things you'll have heard of, private equity firms. Increasingly you see businesses like family offices, people who are investing, sort of very wealthy families, money. And what they're essentially looking for is to look at you through the lens of how they're going to increase your value so that they can make a return. So that's one type of buyer. Then there's what would be thought of as the more typical buyer, which is strategic buyers. So companies who are looking to buy you, and what they're focused on most typically is the benefits of buying your company post-acquisition. So one of the things they're particularly looking at are the benefits that come from integrating you. They won't always integrate you. Sometimes they might look as, you're a good addition, you're a good brand, they'll keep you separate. But a lot of strategic buyers are looking to get you, integrate you into what they do, and as part of that, get benefits or synergies or cost savings or greater growth from that. And so it's important to think about the different types of buyers. And quite often, if you're going to get a great deal, you're going to want to look at the different types of buyers and what they can offer and what the sort of particularly post-sale experiences that you might get. So one of the things to recognise, particularly from private equity buyers, is that they will often buy your company with debt that they've raised from somebody else. What happens to that debt? And a very well-known example of this would be something like when the Glazers bought Manchester United. They bought the club with debt. The debt went onto the balance sheet of Manchester United, and then it's the club that pays, or the company, with some private equity buyers, that pays for servicing that debt over time. So that's just one thing to be aware of. So let's just very quickly, before I hand back to Andy, I'll talk about strategic buyers. And one of the things that they spend a lot of time looking at is the cultural fit between the organisations. So before you get into the sale process, they will spend a fair bit of time sort of prodding at how you work and looking at your company values, how you come across as people, how your leadership teams, your co-founders come across as people, to say, are you going to be a fit? So if we try and integrate you, is this going to work? And of course, as you as the seller, you're also looking to end up somewhere with a strategic buyer, if you're going to be integrated and spend some time there, that actually these are people that you want to spend time with. So a lot of those early conversations are about finding that cultural fit.
Okay, one of the things we spent a lot of time, we talked about that 2-year period, from thinking you want to go to sale. So that 2 years out, we talked about being professional, being profitable. What we see a lot of the time is when we get into these businesses in those early stages is the proposition is actually the founder. He's the person, he or she is the person. So, and they're integral to everything. But a buyer doesn't want that. A buyer wants to know that there's a leadership team in place that can actually manage this without the founder. We do a sort of hit by the bus test, and it's very much saying to the founder at a certain stage, if you took 3 months out of the business, would it run? And unfortunately, a lot of businesses that come to us initially can't pass that test. The founder's doing everything from the finances, new business, marketing, client delivery. And I know you're sitting there going, who are these people? Well, this is the problem. A lot of founders, they hire the right people, but they don't let go. They don't delegate. And unfortunately, they're too integral to the business. So we spend a lot of time working with the founder, letting go, and it's a hard thing to do, but also building up their leadership team, putting in place everyone that's attached to, say, an EMI scheme or an equity scheme, that they're motivated and incentivized to stay around for the whole process. through the growth advisory and through the M&A sale, and then through the earn-out as well. And so we spent a lot of time doing that, and that's really key. We've sold our last 2 deals to US buyers, and it was very key from straight away. They were just like, we are not interested in this business over here because it's 2 people in the leadership team and a founder. We want the founder to be away from this business straight away. So it's an interesting one. Maybe that's not everyone's example here, but where we spend probably, I would say, 30% of our time when we're working with sellers is on the leadership team. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind. I also would say that most of my time is actually doing a deal, but the time I am spending with buyers, it's all about just what they want. I think, David, you mentioned that as well, asking the buyer what they want. I mean, the amount of times you're just speaking to buyers with no intent other than just knowing what they're looking for. And it's really important because there's a lot of people out there who will just kick tires and just waste your time. And I think I could sell me being an advisor to you right now. I think the distraction piece is the biggest one. And that's where we spend a lot of time making sure that the leadership team is focused on growing the business and taking it forward. Because it's very easy to get distracted, like David said, in doing an M&A deal while trying to run your own business at the same time. So that's a really important one for us. But I'll let Marcus move on to the next one.
So, David very helpfully talked about, how do you get advice? Who are the mentors, who are the people that take you through the process? So that's something that we do. But what I can do is give you an example of where that experience helped me in the sale of one of the businesses. Because it's quite a daunting process when you get faced with sort of all of a ton of legal documents that you've not come across for the first time, lots of different process, different, in my experience, I sold my first business, I sold to a very large company in New York, and all of a sudden you're in meetings with, there's 10 corporate development people from the other side, like pinging questions at you. But there was one particular moment where, and we didn't really understand this till later, but there was a process that we were going through in negotiating the deal, and it came down to, well, we're going to use a particular type of accounting principle. And it's either based in the UK principles or US principles. And, I would probably have gone, well, it's UK. We'll go with UK because that's what we know. And before I could do it, our advisor basically, in the nicest possible way, very quietly told me to shut up. And I didn't quite realise why. But he had the experience of seeing of our type of business, what happens when you change between accounting principles and what that does to valuations of business. In my particular case, it was the fact that we were doing part of our value was delivered up front and part was based on a couple of years with the business. What happened was that him telling me to shut up at that moment increased the exit value of my business by 1/3. And so I shall forever be grateful for him for doing that for us. And that was just one 30-second moment of that experience coming to bear in one meeting. So that was the value that I experienced. Do you want to talk about the financial side?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about it, a buyer, you're sending an IM out to a buyer who potentially is going to see probably 50, 60 of those a week. And that's quite daunting when you think about, you're throwing it out there. What we try to do is we try to target our buyers. So when we're looking to send it out to a certain buyer, we already know what sort of profit they're looking for, what sort of cash they're looking for, what sort of a balance sheet they're looking for, what sort of skeletons in the closet they're prepared to tolerate. There's lots of things that we work with buyers, so we're not just throwing it out as a sort of just fishing. And I think that's really important. And I think one of the key things for us is every single buyer that we've sold to in probably the last 5 years is all about profit. They really just want to know, where is your profit right now? What's your growth story to take it forward? I mean, we typically probably don't sell as many startups. We probably typically sell small businesses. Probably, David, I think you mentioned 2 million was yours. Our transaction value size is about 10 to 20 million. So if you're looking at valuing a business based on EBITDA, so let's say you've got a business doing 3 million and your EBITDA is 7. So, you can sort of get a 7 times multiple on a 3 million EBITDA. So I think that's sort of where we play in that sort of space. And it's hard to get to 3 million, right? I mean, that's a huge effort to get there. And buyers are looking at that, but they're wanting to make sure that they're not buying you at the peak. They're not wanting to make sure that 3 million turns into 2 million the next year. So they focus so much on that profit story. And there's a lot of due diligence that goes into that as well. But I would say that if we're approaching new buyers that we're not really familiar with, or our seller has said, I want you to speak to these people, they pretty much don't really take a lot of looking at the proposition at the start. They're very much just, Andy, I want to see the financials. And that's quite a tough conversation to go back to your seller saying, I'm sorry, you're not at 75 headcount, they don't want to do this. Because they get pretty niche at times. And I think that's when you're working with an advisor, you really want to be clear with them on, the advisor needs to be very clear with the seller on that these sort of people over here, they're only interested in if you're more than 100 people. These people here, if you're doing 2 million. These people over here is if your balance sheet is X. And I think that's really important to know as a seller, because it doesn't matter how great your proposition is, it doesn't matter how great a person you are, who your clients are, there are buyers out there who are restricted to an actual financial model that they're not going to budge on. And so I've had some really tough conversations with sellers in the past to go, Andy, these are perfect fit for me. And I'm like, they're perfect fit for you if you're at 3 million EBITDA. Less than that, they're just not going to have a look at you. And so that's a really big expectation to manage at the start of a relationship with an advisor. And I don't know, David, in your case, if that was your advisors work with you like that, sort of speaking to you about what you can expect from certain buyers as well?
Yes, they did. But my experience of the brokers is that they always overvalue the business, and it's a truism, isn't it, that a private company owner always has a higher expectation of what the business is worth than it is in reality, and brokers tend to encourage that. But it's a starting point.
Yes,
it's a starting point. But my experience with brokers is that their focus, 80% of deals don't go through.
Yeah.
Their focus is on getting it across the line, no matter what the terms are, because they'll take a percentage of the consideration, whatever the terms of that consideration are, whether it's going to be all on the day of closure or whether it's going to be 1 year down the line, 2 years down the 3 years, and that's all they're interested in, and that's where I would have found a mentor really helpful.
Yeah, we're not as mean-spirited as that, David. So I would say most of the deals that we do, they're not for the highest price. I mean, it's all about chemistry as well. A lot of these founders and leadership teams have never really had a proper boss before. So trying to get it into their head that they're going to work with somebody for the next 3 years and they'll report into them to some degree, that's quite a tough conversation at times. And so I would say, yes, we're paid on a success fee. There's a retainer up front and a success fee. And yes, it's our best interest to get the biggest value for the client, but not necessarily on some of the terms that exist out there as well. I appreciate we go off on a tangent, so I'll shift back to you, Marcus.
So typically the process is split between two things. So there's the first bit, sort of before you agree what are called the terms, the term sheet, that part where the key elements of the deal are coming together, deciding are you right? You'll get sort of poked and prodded sort of a little bit. And we've talked about those things that people are looking for: cultural fit, strategic fit. Are you right thing for our business? Where's this going to go? What then happens is you get a term sheet, everyone agrees, and you sign on a dotted line, and you get into what's called due diligence. And if there's one thing in running the first business that I wish somebody had told me, it's that you should run your business administration like it was organised like a due diligence process. Because the horror of getting that due diligence sheet and not knowing where everything was, and having in a process where you're trying to give confidence to a potential buyer that you've got everything sorted and scrabbling everything together, was one of the most traumatic experiences of my business life, I have to say. So that was something I definitely learned the hard way. And it's really important to give confidence to buyers. Buyers like people who can answer questions quickly. Now, the reality of it is, if somebody's given you a term sheet, they're very keen on your business, and what they're then looking for are things that might be wrong that they need to uncover. So examples of that, for instance, I mean, we had one recently, didn't kill the deal, but we're in Oxford, so I think it's a good one to talk about, is how overzealous, for instance, have your R&D tax claim advisors been? So typically, these advisors are paid on a percentage, which incentivise them to maximise claims. And we see this, we've seen it recently, where when the other side's lawyers looked at it and going, you can't claim for that, you can't claim for that, and all of a sudden, they're asking you to put aside large chunks of the money in the deal for potential claims on R&D. And that can be set, they can ask you to set aside, what was that, 10 years?
Yeah.
10 years.
I think it's about 7 years, but it can be a chunky sum of money. And we had this example. I mean, I worked Christmas Day last year specifically because of this. The buyer realised that they saw the R&D claim that had gone through, and it was clear they were not going to budge from their point of view. So Christmas morning was spent probably crying, thinking a year of work was about to disappear, but just realising that it's those kind of things. It was a reputable R&D firm. It looked like a valid claim, but there was just a few things in there that unfortunately the buyer got Deloitte actually to come in and have a look at it, tax, so they were working Christmas Eve, Deloitte on it, and it was just one of those moments where we were meant to have closed on the 23rd of December, and here we were, Christmas Day, still arguing over it. And I think it's just so important. The due diligence is so important. There's lots of things we can tell you today, and I think we talked earlier at the start about how we get into businesses 2 years out, and we help them grow, and it's professional and profitable. That's two things to remember. And I think the due diligence process, we now run with most of our clients, it's a quarterly basis. So we have the due diligence checklist that we've crafted over probably 5 years, and we just show our clients and say, this is what you need to be doing and making sure you have every quarter. Because the due diligence process is an absolute killer at times. And if you're not prepared and you don't have somebody on board, like say if David didn't have someone in his team to help him, it's probably down to David to be pulling all these contracts and going and getting all these signatures on contracts that don't exist. It could be answering questions around legal issues that you've had as well. And I just think it's just so important. It gets overlooked so many times. People are like, no, push it down the road. But a buyer will have much more confidence in you and much more respect for you and will push the deal through much quicker if they know you've been following that due diligence process for a long period of time. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I'm happy to send you that checklist actually as well. And it will just help you get your head around like the intensity of that process. It can be grueling at times, and also grueling on us because, I mean, if the founder hasn't been honest with us and we're this far down the road and we feel like we've done all our checks and balances, and here we are on Christmas morning, realising that they forgot to tell us about something. Yeah, it's, we like we said, we get paid on a retainer and a success fee, and that success fee can be quite nice, but that success fee doesn't happen if the deal doesn't happen. So
there's a really simple rule actually with due diligence is before you get into the process, it's way better to suffer the pain of the truth now than the pain of the lie later. And I think if you keep that in mind, I think that's. I've got one last point. I'll hand to Andy. David made a very good point about choosing the right-sized advisors for you, both in terms of, that the person who's going to give you the attention. What you don't want to do is go with too big a firm where you're not going to get sort of the attention, or somebody who's too small, who's not done the types of deals that you're looking to do. That goes also to then the advisors on the legal side. I've had the experience of walking into rooms with lawyers who are underpowered for the deal that we were trying to do. You definitely don't want to walk into a negotiation with Slaughter and May and the big law firms and Oric and their guys from their big global offices to do a big deal if you've got the guy who's helped you over the years and been a bit useful and says he can do M&A. So one of the key things to do is going into those rooms, make sure you've got the right-sized advisors for the deals that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
That was the last bit from me. I'm conscious of time.
No, that's it. I mean, there's a lot to take in. I'm conscious of time, Wendy. We don't want to get in trouble with you. So it's, but like, I mean, we'll be around here after this finishes. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm happy to send you the due diligence checklist. It's 5 years in the making, but trust me, it's just something. I'm sure, David, you had a due diligence checklist that was quite meaty as well. And I just think getting ahead of that and doing it regularly is a big thing to be doing, guys. So that's it from me. Marcus, yep.
We'll move on to questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, do you want to come back and join us? We're going to try and do the same as we did last time and take any online questions. Yeah, I think we've got an online question. They're usually pretty quick to deal with before we move on to a wider discussion. Matt?
Yeah, thanks to all of you for the talk. I'm sure everyone will agree it's been really super interesting to listen to you. We've got a question firstly for David.
I can't actually hear you very well. Is the microphone on?
The microphone's just for the
Oh, I see.
recording. Yeah. So question for David. So obviously you acquired a lot of businesses throughout your journey. Did you need to raise funding for each acquisition?
Initially, yeah, we for our first acquisition, I had a business partner, and we put in a proportion of the capital, and we then took a loan, a bank loan, and then later on the chart, by the time we got to Osborne and Simmons and things like that, we bought it out of cash, and because they were distressed purchases, you're not paying a huge amount for them, and we just paid for that out of cash flow. Actually, funnily enough, with Osborne and Simmons, when we bought it, I don't know how long any of you have been in business, but when we started, we had a relationship manager with our bank, but the banks got rid of all those people, and we wanted to buy Osborne and Simmons, and we just needed to. We knew there were pricing opportunities, and we were going to do various things. We just needed to extend the overdraft for 3 months. The difficulty we had with the chumps at Milton Keynes, trying to get them to understand we don't want a loan, we just want to extend the overdraft. We only want £13,000 for crying out loud. And in the end, I called up the guy who'd been our last relationship manager, because we were both cricket enthusiasts, and I'd entertained him at Lord's several times, and that was money well spent. And I said to him, Richard, we've got this problem. We just need £13,000 for 3 months. And he said, give me the bullet points on a piece of A4, which I did. And by that evening, we had the extension to the overdraft. But after that, we just paid for them out of cash we generated.
Thank you. And then I guess for the other two guys, we spoke a bit there, touched on the valuation of businesses. Yeah. What about for a company which is mostly sort of R&D? How would you go about kind of valuing?
R&D? So what? Probably need a bit more information. Do they have any more information?
So not likely to be sort of revenue generating.
Oh gosh, look, that's a long question. I mean, I could take that might take a while to answer. If they want to reach out to me, I can help them with that question. I think that might take a bit too long, I think, to explain that one. I mean, typically for the businesses we sell, right? I mean, we're all about profit. They have to be making profit. They have to be at a certain level, and so we do a lot of DD on our sellers before we engage with them, also. But because we know what the buyers are looking for. But typically for a business, you've got your normalised EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, and basically you're going to get a multiple on that number. So typically, I mean, we've sold businesses for 16 times, but we've also sold business for 6 times. I would say 16 is very rare, 6 is probably where we don't want to really be. Last 2 businesses we sold were 8 and 10, but that's based on their profit number, and it's based on probably the year before and probably the year just completed as a valuation. Now, if you've got a startup, that's a whole different beast, and Marcus could probably talk to you until next Thursday about that as well.
There's a lot of different factors in, what the R&D is, what the stage is, which sector it's in. A lot of it is about strategic value to the potential purchaser.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to give you a 2-sentence answer, but I think just ask them to reach out to us, and we're happy to respond.
Okay, back into the room then. If you've got a question, stick your hand up, and Wendy will pass the microphone.
Thank you very much for your sharing. Both of you mentioned, mentioned the kind of finding the correct sized advisor. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, and why that would be a good thing? Let's say if I am a kind of a startup company, why would a big firm like, I don't know, Deloitte as an accountant, why would that be a relatively bad thing to pursue for?
It wouldn't be bad. I think it's just, we look at it from this perspective. In the M&A space, David calls it brokers. There's all different terms for us, probably some bad terms as well. But I think what you're looking for is, we know as advisors where to play, what lane to play in, right? So there are certain, you're never going to get sacked for using Goldman Sachs to sell your business, right? But you'll probably pay a lot for it, and they'll bring you some amazing buyers as well. But that's sort of overestimating Goldman Sachs. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. But my point is that if you have a compelling IM sales document for an amazing business with a strong leadership team, with about a checklist of things that I could share with you, it doesn't matter who the buyer is. They'll take that call. They'll take that meeting. You'll get in that door. And I'll give you an example. So I was competing against a very large M&A firm to sell a business. And they were reluctant to go with me because they looked at us as being on the small side. And the point I wanted to make to them was, we've got a fantastic business here that XYZ will want to buy. And they said, we want to be bought by Sir Martin Sorrell. And I was like, okay, right. And so we went into the reasons why. And they said, could you get a meeting with Sir Martin Sorrell? And through our network, because you're keeping in mind that we as M&A firm, that's all we do. We spend a lot of time with buyers. So we reached out to Sir Martin. Within 20 minutes, we got a reply back on the IM. Now, the IM was exceptional. Now, I wouldn't have gone in there if I didn't have confidence in the business. But he has a team, lieutenants probably is the best way to describe it, who absolutely focus on finding great businesses. If you've got a great business, you will get in the door in front of anybody. Now, will you close that deal? That's separate. But you can get in the door with an amazing IM. And the amazing IM is based on, it has to be factual, but it has to show a great growth story and a compelling proposition as well. But the financials are just so important as well. So that's give you an example, right? But there are firms out there, like Results International is somebody. They wouldn't probably play in the 10 to 20 million bracket, transaction size. I think where David talked about, and it's probably very important, is a mentor. A mentor would help you know which firms you probably should be going for and not to be wasting your time on. If you go for a large firm, for example, the person pitching to you is probably the person who's not going to be involved in the deal at all. So for example, if I was at a large M&A firm coming into you, I'd be like, yes, I want your business, but you will probably end up with someone in my team, probably at a mid-level, senior level on certain times. There'll be a lot of juniors doing a lot of work for you. Our USP is that we pitch you, we do the work. So we don't do a lot of deals every year. But what we do is we do all the work. We don't outsource it. We don't put it anywhere else. There's no one hidden. It's Marcus, Nick and I. We do the deal. And I think that's a strong point for a lot of people who are selling. They want to be able to just call us up and have a proper conversation rather than a conversation that goes through a junior to a mid-level to a senior. I'm not sure in your example, David, how that worked with yours. But
well, I agree with you. And I think you made a very important point, Andy, later, is that when you're a small business, there is a temptation to work with Richard. He's been your lawyer for goodness knows how many years, but he's a small guy. He's used to doing conveyancing and wills. He isn't actually up to speed on M&A work and getting due diligence done. And Andy's point was very important. I mean, I cannot emphasise how important due diligence is from both sides. It really is. I mean, when I was selling to these two entrepreneurs, we kept asking them what they were going to do. Oh, well, we're going to just do the same. But yeah, what do you? Well, we own another business which we're going to move here, which turned out to be a lie. But they didn't own another business and they haven't moved it there. We have distribution rights for these products which we're going to bring in, which they didn't have and they haven't brought in. But they wouldn't tell us what they were trying to do. And so it's very, and you have duty, as a seller, you have duties of disclosure. It was very difficult for us then to know what the hell to tell them, and not just leave it to them to find out. And then, of course, they could turn around and say, well, hang on, you didn't tell us that. And there does need to be some dialogue here, but it's absolutely right to get the right legal advice, the right financial advice, and to pick somebody who's the right size for you. I mean, we were with Kingston Smith as accountants, very good accountants, but we were a minnow for them. I mean, even before we started selling, we'd get our accounts the night before they were due in with the HMRC, which is hopeless because you've got no chance to review them, because we were just too small for them to bother with. And that's your problem. You've got to have the person who's got your best interests at heart.
You get the attention always of the best people in the organisation. I've used investment banks to sell sort of divisions in some of the companies that I'm involved in, and if you're trying to sell a 200 million games division to a big company in China, for instance, then you want the guys who've done 10 of those deals before. So they've got to be right for doing that sort of deal. But if you go to those same guys with, I've got a business that I think I can exit between 20 and 30 million, then, you know, you might get the guy, you know, they're trialing out on their first deal who's not done it before. So you need to, I think that's what it means by getting the right size people for the kind of deal that you're looking to do.
Just to close on that point, whenever we get approached from someone saying, would you be interested in talking to us about something, I always say to them, you need to go and speak to other people. And so I would actually give them names of other M&A advisors to speak to as well. You have to do your research though, right? You want to sell your business, you've worked so hard at it, it would be crazy to just pick up for one advisor and do it. So you need to do your homework and go on LinkedIn, go on all the presses, do Google alerts, and just have a look at M&A, type in M&A deals and just keep looking at who the advisors are that are coming through and what spaces they're playing in as well. But I would recommend you speak to probably 5-6 advisors at least before you would consider choosing one.
And again, chemistry I think is really important. You know, you get into quite an intense relationship with the people who are going to go through this process with you. So it's good to build some relationships before you know you want to get going. See, these people I want, you know, I'm very big on the people side, so I will choose people I want to go with. So that's always very important. So you want people, you know, who aren't going to make your teeth grind as you get into it.
I think the clock has probably run down on us now. I'm afraid there's a few questions here, but maybe they can wait till
we're going to be around. We're going to be hanging around. So please, you know, come ask all the questions. We're here to help. So
we need to keep these to time for the online and for later viewing. So I'd just like to thank the speakers tonight. I think we've had some really interesting insights tonight from the other side of the fence, but also from both sides of the fence really tonight. I haven't mentioned Marks and Clark much during this time, but we're really pleased that we've been able to be involved in this event. It's been really interesting for me personally to learn these amazing stories we've heard from people, from AIM listings to trade sales in rapid time to M&As and multiple acquisitions. It's really interesting, and it helps certainly me put my business and professional life into perspective and where it fits. And thank you very much for attending. I think it wouldn't be great if we didn't have lots of people in the audience. So thank you for coming. Thank you for joining online. Thank you for watching later. And maybe we'll see you next year. So thank you very much. Thanks to the speakers.